Mr. William Carter, a 78-year-old black man, has faced many hardships throughout his life, but nothing could prepare him for the humiliation he was about to endure on what seemed like a routine shopping trip. With his bedridden wife at home, entirely dependent on his care, Mr. William found himself in a difficult position, needing to buy adult diapers. As he approached the checkout counter, his heart pounded with anxiety, unable to foresee that a police officer standing behind him in line would turn this simple trip into a scene of public mockery. In that moment of shame, when everything seemed lost, an unexpected hero emerged. Before we continue with the story, leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from, and if you find this story captivating, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss any of our upcoming content. Mr. William Carter had reached an age often called a lifetime, but the challenges he faced never seemed to lessen. At 78, he was a black man living in a small, peaceful neighborhood where he had resided for decades. However, his life no longer resembled those vibrant days when he and his wife Mary were young and healthy. They had once shared happy years together, but now Mr. William bore the entire responsibility of caring for his partner. Mary, who had once been a strong woman, became paralyzed after a serious spinal injury years ago. That fall changed their lives forever. Since then, Mary could no longer move and was confined to her bed, relying entirely on Mr. William's dedicated care. He looked after her every need, from changing diapers and feeding her to helping her with physical therapy exercises to maintain her health. Although his love for Mary remained as strong as ever, this responsibility sometimes became a heavy burden for the elderly man. That morning, like every other, Mr. William prepared for his weekly shopping trip. It wasn't a task he enjoyed, but for Mary's sake, he always tried to complete everything without a complaint. He stood before an old mirror in the bathroom, slowly straightening his shirt that had faded with time. Each wrinkle on his face deepened as he bowed his head to look at the shopping list in his hand. His eyes stopped at a familiar item. Adult diapers. It was a bitter reminder of the reality he and Mary faced every day. Though he had grown accustomed to this task, every time he had to buy diapers, Mr. William couldn't avoid feeling embarrassed. He knew that other people's eyes would follow him as if he were a man who couldn't care for himself or his loved one. That feeling gnawed at his heart, making him more exhausted each day. But he knew Mary needed him, and that was the only reason he continued to persist. Before leaving home, Mr. William turned back to look at his wife lying in the small hospital bed placed in the middle of the living room. The room, once the family's main living space, was now filled with medical equipment. Everything from the oxygen tank to medicine bottles cluttered the bedside table. Mary, although unable to move, still had the bright gaze she had always had. They didn't need to speak much. Just a look was enough to understand each other. Though unspoken, Mary's eyes always held deep gratitude for Mr. William, the man who had stayed by her side through happiness and hardship. Mr. William leaned down, gently kissed his wife's forehead. "I'm heading to the store, Mary," he whispered, his voice filled with love and care. Mary responded with a tender look, a faint smile crossing her weary face. Taking a deep breath, Mr. William put on his old coat and picked up his worn, reusable shopping bags. He stepped out the door, leaving behind the house where he always felt safe and comfortable. Outside, the morning air was fresh, but it also carried the weight of his responsibilities. He knew this trip would not be easy. Even for a simple task like buying diapers for his wife, he couldn't escape the feeling of being judged whenever he stepped into a store. With one last look at his small home, Mr. William bravely walked out, filled with anxiety about what he might face. But he also knew that, like every other day, he would return home, carrying the necessary items for the woman he loved most. On the familiar path to the local grocery store, he couldn't help but think about the stranger's stares, the constant judgment he faced whenever he went shopping. When he walked into Simmons's store, a place he had known for years, the tension in his chest began to build. Simmons's was a small shop, long-standing in the neighborhood, with narrow aisles and dim lighting. Mr. William knew every corner of this store, but that didn't make the embarrassment any less each time he approached the aisle for adult diapers. For him, it was always a journey filled with shame. His steps slowed as he made his way through the aisles, knowing well his destination was the section he always wanted to avoid. He felt as if everyone was watching him, tracking his every move. In reality, there were only a few customers in the store at this early hour, but the feeling of being judged lingered constantly in his mind. His mind kept replaying the silent remarks he imagined people were thinking. This old black man can't even take care of himself, yet he's buying diapers for his wife. When he reached the shelf, Mr. William reached out to pick up a pack of adult diapers. The crinkling sound of the plastic packaging echoed loudly in the quiet store, making him feel as if the noise had drawn all eyes toward him. He tried to hide his discomfort, clutching the pack tightly to his chest, as if trying to shield it from the world around him. But soon after, as he lined up at the checkout, something unexpected happened. As he neared the cashier, Mr. William began to feel an unsettling presence behind him. Laughter erupted from a man standing right behind him, a white police officer, dressed neatly in uniform with a smug and condescending expression. "Well, look who it is," the officer spoke loudly and clearly so that everyone around could hear. "An old black man buying diapers. Must be for himself, right? Or maybe he can't take care of himself and his wife." The mockery felt like knives stabbing into Mr. William's pride. He tried to ignore it, his eyes fixed on the floor, his hands gripping the pack of diapers even tighter. But the insults kept coming, growing more vicious. "Buying diapers, huh? It's like you're just a big old baby, growing old just to become a kid again, right?" The officer laughed loudly, deliberately speaking so everyone nearby could join in the mockery. Mr. William could feel the eyes of other customers turning towards him. Some looked at him with curiosity. Others couldn't hide their contemptuous smiles. Mr. William's face burned, not just from embarrassment, but from the shame of having his race openly ridiculed. Throughout his life, he had faced racism, but even at his age, hearing such words still cut deeply. The insults attacked not only his weakness from age or his wife's condition, but also his identity and dignity as a black man living in a prejudiced society. Every second in line felt like an eternity. Mr. William just wanted it all to end quickly so he could leave. But the officer continued, his voice growing louder and more arrogant. "It's just like an old black man who can't take care of himself. You see, poor when young, weak and dependent when old." Mr. William remained silent, but inside shame and anger swelled. He was humiliated not only for buying diapers for his wife, but also because of his skin color, a blow to his dignity and worth, things he had fought to protect all his life. But just as he felt himself about to be overwhelmed by this shame, a steady yet powerful voice broke through from the front of the checkout counter. "Sir, that's not right, and you're not allowed to speak like that," the firm voice of Jacob, a young man working behind the counter, rang out. Everyone in the store, including the officer, suddenly stopped laughing and turned their attention to Jacob, who had just spoken up bluntly and bravely. Jacob's voice wasn't raised, but the confidence and determination in his words made it impossible to ignore. The officer turned around, squinting, looking at Jacob with a challenging glare. "What did you just say?" he asked scornfully, not believing that a young cashier would dare confront him, a representative of authority. Jacob, a young black man with a simple appearance, looked the officer straight in the eye without backing down. "I said you're not allowed to mock and insult others because of their age or their race," Jacob replied, his voice calm but resolute. "Mr. Carter deserves respect, just like anyone else in this store." Jacob's words rang out like a powerful wave through the store, causing not only the officer, but everyone else around to be stunned. The air grew heavy, the silence thick enough to hear Mr. Williams' heavy breathing. The feeling of humiliation began to fade as he heard Jacob's voice, a voice that not only stood up for him, but also awakened the fairness and dignity that had been trampled on. The officer, unwilling to accept being challenged publicly, stepped closer to Jacob, his face filled with anger. "Do you know who you're talking to?" I'm a police officer, and what are you? Just a small cashier in this little store. Jacob didn't flinch, his eyes still holding that unwavering determination. I know who you are, but that doesn't give you the right to trample on someone else's dignity, he said, each word a challenge against. The abuse of power. Your job is to protect the community, not to mock and humiliate the vulnerable. Jacob's words left the officer momentarily speechless. The customers in the store, who had been silent spectators to the insult, began to murmur, some nodding in agreement with Jacob's bravery. A new atmosphere started to fill the space, one of justice and resistance against injustice. The officer, though furious, was clearly caught off guard by Jacob's resolve and the shift in the atmosphere around him. He took a step back, trying to regain his authority, but it was clear his confidence had been shaken. You'll regret talking to me like that, he said, his voice menacing, before turning and leaving the store, not forgetting to cast a sharp glare at both Jacob and Mr. William. The store fell into a strange, heavy silence after the officer left. Each moment of quiet seemed to stretch on forever. Jacob turned back to Mr. William, his eyes now gentle, no longer hard as they had been when facing the officer. You didn't deserve that, Mr. Carter, he said softly, his voice full of respect. No one deserves to be treated that way. Mr. William, who hadn't been able to speak until now due to overwhelming emotion, looked at Jacob with gratitude in his eyes. For the first time that day, he felt the shame and embarrassment begin to fade. Jacob's words had stirred a new feeling in him, that there were still people, even young ones, who knew how to stand up for what was right, for justice, and for the dignity of others. Other customers in the store, who had initially remained silent during the insult, now whispered their admiration for Jacob. A few nodded toward Mr. William, expressing sympathy and regret for not speaking up sooner. And Jacob, Mr. William's unexpected hero, calmly continued with his work, as if what had just happened was only natural. Jacob didn't just defend Mr. William, he awakened a sense of fairness and solidarity among those around him. After the officer left the store, the space seemed to sink into quiet, as everyone reflected on what had just occurred. Mr. William still stood there, the pack of diapers in his hands, feeling a mixture of relief and gratitude, but a part of him remained anxious. He knew that this incident wasn't over, and the officer might not easily let go of being confronted like that. The glances from the remaining shoppers gradually became less judgmental, but Mr. William could still sense the uncertainty in the air. Some whispered among themselves, while others nodded in agreement with Jacob's actions, but all seemed awkward about what had just happened. No one dared to step forward to support Jacob when the officer was making his insults. Only when the officer left did the silence seem to admit the wrong actions that had occurred earlier. Mr. William bowed his head and sighed softly. His heart still raced, not just from anxiety, but from the emotions swelling inside him. He had endured so much discrimination and humiliation in his life, but being mocked publicly like this at his age truly left a bitter taste. His life should have been past the point of facing such injustices, but perhaps society hadn't truly changed. Jacob, after facing the officer, quietly returned to the cash register, continuing his work. He tried to maintain his calm, but his eyes couldn't hide the brief flicker of worry. He knew that what he had just done wasn't easy, especially when standing up to a police officer, someone with considerable power in the community. Yet Jacob didn't regret speaking up for Mr. William. Even if it meant he would face consequences, he knew that he had done the right thing. In the tense atmosphere, the store's manager, Mr. Simmons, a middle-aged man with graying hair, hurriedly stepped out from behind the office area. His face was visibly worried, his eyes scanning the remaining customers before stopping on Jacob. It was clear that Mr. Simmons had realized that something bad had happened, and it made him anxious. Seeing an angry police officer leaving his store was not what he wanted, especially with a regular and important customer like that. "What just happened here?" Mr. Simmons asked, his voice tense and somewhat irritated. He looked directly at Jacob, expecting him to explain immediately what had gone down. "Jacob, I just saw that officer leave with an angry look. You know he's a regular customer of our store, right? You can't treat a customer like that." Jacob looked up from the cash register, his eyes still calm but clearly tired after the ordeal. "I know he's a customer, but I couldn't stay silent while Mr. William was being humiliated like that," he replied, his voice straightforward and resolute. "He might be a police officer, but that doesn't give him the right to mock and insult an elderly man just because of his race or his circumstances." Mr. Simmons stared at Jacob in disbelief, as if he couldn't fathom that a young cashier would speak so boldly. The air in the store became even more stifling as the tension between the manager and Jacob rose. Customers began to slowly move out of the store, not wanting to linger too long after what had just happened. Some glanced at Jacob with approval, but no one dared to speak up. "Jacob, do you understand what just happened?" Mr. Simmons continued, his voice now softer but still full of underlying anger. "That was a police officer, a man of authority. You've damaged an important relationship for our store. This could affect our business. Did you think about that?" Jacob remained silent for a moment, as if carefully choosing his words. He knew well that what he had done might cause trouble for the store, but he had no regrets. "Mr. Simmons, I understand that, but I couldn't ignore the injustice. I couldn't stand by and watch Mr. William be humiliated like that and do nothing. We can't let some people's power override what's right." The manager clearly hesitated, his eyes lingering on Jacob for a long moment, then turning to Mr. William. He realized that Mr. William, the elderly customer, had witnessed everything and had been the one most hurt by the situation. But as a businessman, Mr. Simmons couldn't ignore the potential consequences of letting his employee confront the police. It could cause problems not only for the store, but also for himself. Mr. William, seeing the tension between Jacob and the manager, felt guilty. He never wanted things to escalate like this, and more than anything, he didn't want Jacob to face trouble just for defending him. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but his throat choked with emotion. Finally, he stepped forward, gently placing his hand on the counter, and speaking with a deep yet determined voice. Jacob didn't do anything wrong. He only stood up for what's right. Both Jacob and Mr. Simmons turned to look at Mr. William. His eyes were filled with sincerity and gratitude. "I've lived through many decades, and I know when I'm being treated unfairly. That officer didn't just insult me for my age and circumstances, but also for my race." Jacob spoke up for what everyone should have said. The store fell silent again, with everyone focused on Mr. William's words. His words weren't just for Jacob or Mr. Simmons, but they also served as a reminder to everyone present. A brief moment of silence followed. Then Mr. Simmons sighed, as if he understood there was nothing more to argue about. He knew he couldn't fault Jacob, but he still worried about what might come next. "All right, we'll talk about this later," Mr. Simmons said, his voice softer but still tinged with tension. He turned to Mr. William, offering a forced smile. "Mr. Carter, please finish your shopping. Everything you purchase today will be on the house." Mr. William nodded slightly, feeling a small sense of relief. But he knew that this story was far from over. When he received his bags from Jacob, he could feel the tension still hanging in the air. The eyes of the remaining customers glanced his way, but now they no longer held the judgment or mockery they had before. Instead, there was respect and perhaps a bit of regret for not speaking up alongside Jacob when the officer insulted him. Mr. William walked slowly to the door, but before leaving, he couldn't stop himself from turning back. Despite having his pride wounded by the mockery earlier, he felt a warm light in his heart today. Jacob, the young man he had just met for the first time, had spoken up for him when no one else dared. It was what moved him most, far beyond the humiliation he had endured. He knew that not everyone would have done that, especially when facing a powerful police officer. Mr. William turned back, looking at Jacob with sincere gratitude. Jacob, though still maintaining his calm, couldn't hide a bit of worry on his face. Surely the young man understood that his actions could bring consequences. Mr. William walked slowly towards Jacob, heavy shopping bags in hand, but his eyes shone with appreciation. "Thank you, Jacob," he said, his voice deep but full of sincerity. "You did something not everyone would do. I am truly grateful that you stood up for me, for all of us like me." Jacob smiled lightly, and the worry seemed to fade for a moment. "It's nothing, Mr. Carter," Jacob replied, his voice gentle yet full of determination. "I just did what I thought was right. You didn't deserve to be treated like that, and I couldn't stay silent in the face of injustice." Mr. William nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. He realized that this young man was not just any cashier. He had a strong heart, ready to defend what was right even if it meant facing trouble. To Mr. William, Jacob wasn't just a helper during a difficult moment. He was a symbol of a younger generation willing to stand up against injustice, something Mr. William had longed for all his life. "You know," Mr. William continued, his voice quivering with emotion, "all my life I've faced situations like this, being looked down on, mocked just because of my race. But today you did something remarkable. You didn't just help me maintain my dignity. You gave me hope that the world can change, that there are still people willing to stand up for what's right." Jacob stood in silence, listening to each word from Mr. William, as if a light of realization and firm determination was growing stronger in his eyes. Mr. William's words confirmed that he had done the right thing, and even though he might face difficulties, he knew he had no regrets about his decision. Mr. William wanted to say more, but then he simply placed a hand on Jacob's shoulder, a light touch but full of meaning. "Thank you, Jacob," he repeated, this time with a softer tone, as if he wasn't just thanking Jacob for his actions in the store, but for showing him that there were still young people, brave and fighting for what's just. Jacob smiled back. "Mr. Carter, you go home now, don't worry anymore. If anything happens, I'll handle it. As for the officer, I know it'll be tough, but I'll be okay." But Mr. William couldn't help but worry for the young man. Jacob had stood up to defend him, but it could mean that Jacob would lose his job, and in a small town like this, confronting the police wasn't an easy matter. Mr. William understood that, and his heart continued to fear for Jacob's future. With a gentle smile, Mr. William finally turned and walked out of the store. He breathed in the cool morning air, but inside there was a mix of relief and anxiety. He knew he had met a true hero, a young man willing to stand against injustice. But at the same time, he also knew that this could bring many challenges for Jacob. On his way back home, each step Mr. William took felt heavier with thoughts about Jacob's future. The young man had so much potential, and Mr. William hoped that Jacob's brave action wouldn't come at too high a cost. When he reached his doorstep, he paused, took a deep breath, and glanced back towards the store, where Jacob had stood up for what was right. He silently hoped that good things would come to the young man, but he knew that the world wasn't always fair to those as brave as Jacob. When he entered his home, the quiet atmosphere immediately calmed Mr. William's turbulent heart. Mary still lay in her bed, her eyes lighting up when she saw him walk in with the shopping bags. He gave her a gentle smile, trying to hide his worries so she wouldn't have to be concerned. After placing the bags on the table, he sat down beside the bed, gently stroking her hand. "I'm back, Mary," he said softly, his voice filled with affection but unable to hide the weight he carried inside. Mary, though unable to speak, still communicated through her expressive eyes. She looked at her husband, sensing that something wasn't quite right, her eyes full of curiosity and concern. Mr. William sighed quietly, deciding to tell her everything that had happened at the store. He spoke about the police officer, the humiliation he endured, and especially about Jacob, the young man who had bravely defended him. As he talked about Jacob, his voice softened with warmth and gratitude. "He really stood up for us, Mary," he said, his eyes turning somber as he thought about the challenges Jacob might face. "But I'm worried that this will cause trouble for him. He's young, he shouldn't have to suffer consequences just for doing what's right." Mary's gaze grew gentle, as if she were trying to comfort him. Mr. William knew that she shared his worry for Jacob, but there was no way to banish the feeling. He blamed himself for being the reason Jacob had to take such a risk. If it hadn't been for Jacob, He might have had to endure that humiliation in silence, but now the person who had helped him might be facing unforeseen consequences. That night, Mr. William couldn't sleep peacefully. He lay restless in bed, his mind swirling with thoughts about Jacob. The image of the young man standing firm against the officer replayed vividly in his mind. Jacob had acted with such courage, and he couldn't stop thinking that those actions might lead to Jacob losing his job or, worse, facing retaliation from the police. Mr. William had lived long enough to know that situations like this rarely ended simply. The next morning, even before the sun had fully risen, Mr. William decided to return to Simmons's store. He needed to make sure that Jacob was all right, and if anything had happened, he would find a way to help him. As he crossed his home's threshold, his heart sank with an unrelenting worry. He knew he couldn't do much for Jacob, but he couldn't let him face this alone. As he approached the store, the anxiety inside him grew. He entered, hoping to see Jacob behind the cash register as usual, but when he looked around, the register was empty. Jacob wasn't there. Another employee, a young woman, was working in his place. Mr. William walked over, his heart pounding with a sense that something was wrong. "Hello, ma'am, may I ask, where is Jacob?" Mr. William asked, his voice deep with concern. The young woman looked up, hesitating before answering. "Jacob, he hasn't come into work today," she said, her face showing a hint of hesitation. "Actually, he hasn't been here since yesterday. I don't know what happened, but it seems he's in trouble after the incident with the officer." Her words hit Mr. William like a knife to the heart. His fears had become reality. The officer hadn't let things go with Jacob. The anxiety inside him surged as he imagined all the bad situations that might have befallen the young man. Jacob could have lost his job, or worse, he might have faced retaliation from the officer. A wave of guilt swept over Mr. William. If it hadn't been for him, Jacob wouldn't be in this situation. He knew Jacob had done the right thing, but now the young man was paying the price. He needed to find a way to help him, but how? Mr. William didn't know what he could do, but he couldn't stand by while the person who had saved him was in trouble. The young woman continued to look at Mr. William with sympathy, as if she understood the worry in his eyes. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Carter," she said gently. "I don't know much more, but I hope Jacob will be all right." Mr. William said nothing more, just nodded his thanks and left the store. Outside, the air was still fresh, but his heart was in turmoil. The young man had done what was right, had stood up for justice, but why was fairness so harsh? On his way back home, he couldn't stop thinking about Jacob. Would he be okay? Had he lost his job? Would the officer seek revenge? These questions swirled in Mr. William's mind, leaving him unable to find peace. He continued visiting the store daily, hoping to see Jacob, but each time he received the same answer from the employees. Jacob hasn't come to work. Mr. William's worry grew each day, making him feel that something was not right. He couldn't just sit back and do nothing. A few days later, on a warm afternoon, Mr. William decided to change his usual route home. Instead of taking the familiar path, he walked through the town's small shopping area, hoping to come across Jacob by chance. The street was bustling with people, but in Mr. William's mind there was only one question. Where is Jacob? As he walked along the street, Mr. William suddenly saw a familiar figure from a distance. It was a young man sitting on the curb, leaning against the wall of a closed shop. His thin shoulders, worn-out coat, and lonely demeanor made Mr. William recognize him instantly. It was Jacob. Mr. William's heart ached at the sight of the young man's condition. He quickly walked closer, and as he drew nearer, Jacob looked up, his eyes tired and filled with a touch of shame. Both men sat in silence for a moment, as if surprise and embarrassment held them in that moment. Jacob was the first to speak, his voice hoarse and weak. "Hello, Mr. Carter," Jacob said softly, a hint of embarrassment flickering in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't want you to see me like this." Mr. William sat down next to Jacob, his legs aching with age, but he paid no mind to that now. He felt he needed to sit by Jacob, to show that he wasn't alone. "It's all right, Jacob," Mr. William said, his voice warm and gentle. "I'm the one who should be apologizing. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't be in trouble." Jacob shook his head, trying to stay composed but unable to hide the weariness and pain in his eyes. "No, Mr. Carter, it's not your fault. I stood up for what was right, but—" He trailed off as if he didn't want to continue, but the concerned look in Mr. Williams' eyes made him feel that he could trust him. "After the incident at the store, that officer filed a complaint with the manager. They said other customers also complained about me. In the end, I got fired. They said I had damaged the store's reputation." Mr. William felt his heart tighten. His worries had become a reality. Jacob had lost his job simply for standing up for what was right. "Jacob, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice filled with remorse. Jacob gave a faint, sad smile. "Actually, losing that job was just the last straw, Mr. Carter. My life was already in a mess before. I lost my home, and after I got fired, I had nowhere else to go. I tried looking for new work, but—" He stopped, his voice growing quieter, the exhaustion seeming to weigh heavily on his shoulders. "I've lost everything," Jacob said, his eyes gazing into the distance as if he had no hope left. "But I don't regret what I did at the store. If I had to do it again, I'd still stand up for you." Mr. William listened quietly, his heart filled with a mix of empathy, gratitude, and sorrow for the young man sitting before him. Jacob, even after losing everything, still held on to his courage and resolve. It moved Mr. William deeply. "You did the right thing, Jacob," Mr. William said, his voice full of determination, "and I won't let you bear the consequences alone." Jacob looked at Mr. William, surprised. "You don't have to do anything, Mr. Carter. I'll be all right. I just need some time to find myself again." But Mr. William wouldn't listen. "No, Jacob, you don't have to go through this alone. You stood up for me when I needed help, and now it's my turn to do the same for you." Mr. William felt a strong resolve arise within him. Although he didn't have much money or resources, he couldn't let Jacob sink deeper into hardship on his own. His eyes shone with determination, and he knew what he had to do. "Come with me, Jacob," Mr. William said, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "Come home with me. Mary and I have a spare room, and we'd be happy to have you stay with us. You don't have to face this alone anymore." Jacob was silent for a moment, as if he couldn't believe this unexpected offer. "Mr. Carter, I can't. I don't want to be a burden on you and Mrs. Carter." Mr. Williams smiled gently, but his smile was full of empathy and resolve. "There's no burden, Jacob. You helped me when I needed it, and now I'm just returning the favor. We'll get through this together." Jacob looked at Mr. William, his eyes filled with emotions, gratitude, relief, and a spark of hope that he thought he had lost. Finally, Jacob nodded, agreeing. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. I really don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Mr. William replied, gently standing up. "Just come home with me." And so the two men, one old and one young, walked together down the path home. Mr. William felt a weight lifted off his heart, knowing that he wasn't just helping Jacob, but had also found a friend, someone with whom he could share life's burdens. And for Jacob, for the first time in days, he felt he was no longer alone in this struggle. When they arrived home, Mr. William gently opened the door and invited Jacob inside. The small, cozy home, filled with simple yet worn items, brought a sense of peace and safety to Jacob, something he had long lost. Mary, though unable to move much, could sense the presence of a stranger in the house, and her eyes shone with curiosity. Mr. William approached her bed, taking her hand and explaining gently. "This is Jacob, Mary. He's the young man who helped me at the store that day, and now he's going to stay with us for a while," he said, his voice full of love but also carrying a hope that she would accept this, knowing that Mary always understood him better than anyone. Mary's eyes lingered on Jacob, then she nodded softly, a weak but warm smile on her weary face. Jacob approached, bowing his head with respect. "Hello, ma'am, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'll do my best to help you both in any way I can." Mr. William showed Jacob to the spare room he had mentioned. It was a small, simple room, but it was warm and clean. Jacob couldn't hide his emotions as he looked into the space Mr. William had prepared for him. After days of sleeping outside without a roof over his head, this room felt like the safe haven he had dreamed of. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Carter. This is too much," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. Mr. William smiled. "It's nothing, Jacob. Having you with us is a joy. Make yourself at home." In his first few days living with Mr. William, Jacob was still a bit reserved. He didn't want to be a burden to the Carters, but both Mr. William and Mary treated him like family. Jacob gradually began to help Mr. William with daily tasks, fixing small things around the house, tending to the garden, and especially caring for Mary when Mr. William needed a break. Jacob's presence made everything easier for Mr. William. Tasks he had once shouldered alone now had someone to share them with. Jacob wasn't just a physical help. He brought new life to the home. Mr. William noticed it during those afternoons when he and Jacob would sit together, sharing stories about their lives and pasts. Jacob spoke of his life, of the losses and struggles he had faced, from his time in the military to the betrayal of his wife, and his battles with addiction that had led him to lose everything. These stories only made Mr. William appreciate him more. Over time, Jacob not only helped the Carters, but began to think about rebuilding his life. One afternoon, while sitting with Mr. William on the porch, watching the garden, Jacob talked about wanting to seek help to deal with his alcoholism, a problem he had struggled with for years. "Mr. Carter, I've been thinking a lot. I don't want to live like this anymore. I want to change," Jacob confessed. "I want to seek help, to get sober and start over." Mr. William looked at Jacob with encouraging eyes. "I'm so proud of you, Jacob. The important thing is that you've realized that, and I'll be with you every step of the way. You don't have to do this alone." With Mr. William's support, Jacob began attending group support meetings for those struggling with alcohol addiction. Each day he grew stronger, both physically and mentally. He started spending more time taking care of Mary and learning to do things he never thought he could. Jacob's progress wasn't limited to his sobriety. With Mr. William's help, he also began looking for a new job. After some time, thanks to the skills he had learned in the military and his relentless efforts, Jacob found work at a local community center as a maintenance technician. This job not only provided him with a stable income, but also helped him feel valued, that his life was back on track. Throughout every step of Jacob's journey, Mr. William was there, quietly encouraging and supporting him. He knew that this young man deserved a second chance, and with each passing day, Jacob became an indispensable part of the Carters' lives. Mary grew fond of Jacob as well. Each time she saw Jacob taking care of her husband, she smiled silently. In her heart, Jacob wasn't just a helper. He was like the son she and Mr. William never had. The home, once filled with burdens and loneliness, had become warmer thanks to Jacob's presence. As time went by, life for the Carters and Jacob gradually became more stable. Jacob was no longer a stranger or just someone staying temporarily. He had become a part of that small, irreplaceable family. Jacob's work at the community center continued to improve. He not only excelled in his role as a maintenance technician, but was also loved by everyone for his genuine character and willingness to help. Jacob began rebuilding his life from simple yet solid foundations, and most importantly, he regained confidence in himself. However, the most precious thing was the growing bond between Jacob and the Carters. To Mr. William, Jacob was not just a young companion, but like a son he and Mary never had. Jacob helped Mr. William care for Mary every day, and the three often shared stories of their past, the hardships they had overcome, and even their hopes for the future. One evening, as the three of them sat in the garden watching the gentle sunset, Mr. William turned to Jacob, his voice deep but full of emotion. "Jacob, you know, you're not just a companion. You've become a part of this family. Both Mary and I consider you a real son." Jacob, though accustomed to the affection the Carters showed him, couldn't help but be moved by these words. He looked up at Mr. William, his eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. You and Mrs. Mary have given me not just a home, but hope, something I thought I'd lost a long time ago." Both Mr. William and Mary smiled. Mary, though unable to speak, always had her eyes shining with joy whenever she saw Jacob and her husband chatting happily. The bond between the three of them had become something sacred and more precious than anything Mr. William could have hoped for in his old age. Jacob continued his journey with the emotional support and love from his new family. He not only maintained his job, but found meaning in helping those around him. Whenever he returned to the Carters' small home, he always felt warmth and love. It wasn't just a temporary shelter, but a true home, where he had found himself again. As time passed, Jacob continued to grow, both in his outlook and in his life. He had moved beyond his troubled past and found a new purpose in life. What he once thought impossible, a stable and happy life, now stood clearly before him. Jacob didn't just transform himself, he brought joy and connection to the lives of Mr. William and Mary. Mr. William, Mary, and Jacob had become a family, not through blood, but because they found in each other empathy, kindness, and silent sacrifice. The pains, loneliness, and feelings of failure from the past now seemed like distant memories, replaced by moments of joy, gratitude, and love. Life, though it never lacks challenges and hardships, taught them that, in the darkest moments, sometimes all it takes is one person to stand up, speak out for what's right, and extend a helping hand. It can change the lives of all three, Mr. William, Mary, and Jacob. Under the setting sun, the three of them sat together, silent but filled with peace. Life, though it carried many burdens, had become lighter thanks to love and mutual support. Jacob had found a family, and Mr. William and Mary had found a son they never had. Together, they faced their challenges, and through that, built a new family, one filled with warmth, love, and unity. And so, from the darkest moments of loneliness and pain, a light had emerged, love and kindness that transformed the lives of all three. This story reminds us that sometimes just a small act, a fair word, or a helping hand at the right time can create miracles. Family isn't only created by blood, but by sharing, understanding, and compassion. Life can be tough, but when we find empathy and love, we don't just overcome, we grow stronger and find happiness. And if this story teaches us anything, it's that no matter the circumstance, kindness and bravery always bring hope, lighting the way for ourselves and those around us. If you find this story meaningful and inspiring, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for more heartwarming, meaningful stories like this one. Thank you for watching.